Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and welcome to my review for Dying Light the Following, the long-awaited, countryside-focused, open-world, buggy-fueled expansion is finally live for Dying Light, and I have been playing an absurd amount of it with my brother. I have to say, much like the base game for Dying Light, you can still enjoy it alone, but playing with a group of friends, even one friend, is most definitely a force multiplier, and there's just more potential to create memories and stories and epic moments when you're playing alongside of another person. It's very much the same situation here inside of the Following. So let's start by talking about where the Following is in regards to its story. Like, why are you in the countryside? What brought Kyle Crane here, the main character? And what are your plans? You know, what is the goal of the Following? Apart from, of course, to have fun and enjoy a giant sandbox full of dirt buggies. Basically, the way to look at it is Kyle Crane was sitting in the tower drinking some lemonade, enjoying the sunset, realizing that they still haven't found a cure for the zombie virus. Fortunately, some stranger stumbles on in claiming to be from outside of Haran, which is a big deal in itself because everyone currently believes that you can't actually make your way out of Haran. It is 100% locked down. The stranger tells him otherwise and then also goes on to say that there are a group of survivors out in the countryside that are actually immune to the virus. Kyle Crane, being the hero and awesome guy that he is, decides to head out into the countryside and see if any of this man's words are actually true. That's the Following, in a nutshell. Basically, you're trying to find the truth. And I can tell you, 10 hours into the game, I'm still trying to find the truth. It's a pretty deep and lengthy expansion. There's a lot to do, and you're probably going to get sidetracked just smashing zombies and more zombies and more zombies with your dirt buggies. But we'll get to that a little bit later. The first thing to know is that the Following is actually a game within a game. You don't actually go to the countryside from a quest or a mission inside of the base game save. You actually start a brand new save that is separate from your core save, that is a Following save. And that's going to go ahead and import your current Kyle Crane character. So whatever equipment, whatever melee weapons, whatever stats, whatever skills you've spent in your skill trees, that's the character you're going to have when you boot up the Following for the first time. Now, right from the get-go, you can play it co-op. There's no sort of like prologue mission you have to play in the Following. You can invite a friend and get ready to rock and roll. However, they have recommended that you will have a character that is at least level 12, and you do have to have completed the prologue for the base game before you can actually launch a character in the Following. Now, there is some leeway with that character level. Obviously, this is just a recommendation. It's not actually mandatory to have a level 12 character to make it into the Following. In fact, my brother was level 8 and I was level 14 when we booted up the Following, and we did okay on hard difficulty. But I would say for the sanity of any of you out there who are maybe just picking up Dying Light because the Following looks really awesome to you, do yourself a favor, play the base game, and get close to level 12. As close as you can get before you just can't wait any longer and then hop into the Following. It's going to be a great way to learn the base mechanics of the game. You're going to understand the parkour system, the crafting system, the melee weapon system, how to do melee attacks, all that stuff. And it's going to give you time to develop your very own Kyle Crane. That way, when you do hop into the Following, everything's just going to play out a little bit more smoothly, and the experience is going to be a little bit more enjoyable for you. Now, I feel it would be blasphemy if we didn't start talking about the Following by starting with the dirt buggies themselves. They, of course, are the stars of the Following. They're what Techland teased first and foremost, and they are by far the most exciting part of this expansion. They're also the most substantially different part of this expansion compared to everything else Dying Light has offered up until now. I mean, the Following is really just a completely different experience in terms of its environment and its core aspects. But what I mean by that is, you look at the base game for Dying Light, you're in a city, you're, tight, small corridors, there's a huge focus on the parkour, and obviously the melee combat, everything that makes Dying Light Dying Light. Now, flip side, we're out in this big open countryside, there are very few buildings, you still, of course, use your parkour ability, and now the primary weapon at hand is the dirt buggies. Yes, you still engage zombies with melee weapons. Melee weapons are still important. There's still a ton of melee weapons and loot to discover and find. They've even increased the drop rate of legendary, rare, and even gold tier melee weapons. So there's still a lot of loot to discover. But as I said, at the core of the Following, your brand new weapon, your most valuable tool, is indeed the dirt buggy. Now, they could have just thrown in a dirt buggy and said, here you go, run over zombies and travel from point A to point B. But they wanted to take it a step further. They wanted to make sure it was just like the melee weapons that you used in Crane's arsenal in the base game. And to do that, they gave the player a huge level of customization and upgradability to the buggies themselves. You actually have a driver skill tree now. It's an additional skill tree that is 100% focused on upgrading your buggy. And you'll gain experience just from driving the buggy. And you'll gain even more experience from driving the buggy and accidentally running over a hell of a lot of zombies. In fact, one of the best ways to upgrade your driver skill tree, small pro tip from somebody right here, is to go out in the nighttime when you get that boosted experience and run over as many zombies as you can. Now that, of course, isn't without its risks, as we will talk about in a moment. Let's talk about that driver skill tree again. As you upgrade that driver skill tree after you smash, say, 1,000 zombies, you'll actually gain points which you can then spend in the skill tree that will allow you to do anything from reinforce its roll cage, add UV headlights, to adding UV lamps that act as a small safe zone outside of the vehicle, flamethrowers, electrified cages. The list goes on and on and on. At the core of that system, though, is the ability to craft higher level components for the buggy, up to level 5 in fact. Now these components are what make your buggy tick. They're what allow you to make your buggy faster. They let you make it turn better. They let you make it drive better. And there are several of them. You have an engine kit, you have a turbo kit, you have a suspension kit, a brake kit, and a traction kit, which is essentially your tires. As I said, each of these can be upgraded to level 5. You can either craft them, you can find them out in the open world from traders or in loot chests. Now, much like the melee weapons in the game, these will actually break down over time. They take damage when you do run into zombies, when you run into objects, when you cause any sort of physical damage to your buggy, these components will take damage and they will have to be repaired. Now, much like the melee weapons again, they have a limited number of repairs, which means eventually they will break, they will be destroyed, and you will have to replace them. So they followed the same sort of mechanics they used for the melee weapons to make sure that you are always looking for that next best weapon. They did the same thing with the components for the buggies. This is going to go either way for you. Some people hated that their weapons broke down. I loved it. It kept me on my feet. It made sure I was looking for the next best thing, and it meant that I just wasn't infinitely hoarding melee weapons in a game that is quite a bit about inventory management. The same is being done here for the buggies. It also helps maintain that sense of survival, the fact that you're a scavenger. You're out here living off of what remains of the earth, trying to do the best that you can, and that goes along with your buggy. I totally dig that. I love it. Although one thing to note is you won't be finding a lot of these components that you need to repair and upgrade your buggy inside of the same loot chest that you'll find the stuff to craft, say, medkits and Molotovs. You're actually going to have to search vehicles. Luckily, the countryside is filled with them. You can actually loot their engines for screws, synthetic oils, and wires, which you can use to craft and repair those components along the way. So you're going to want to keep an eye out for that. Now, the buggy itself also has a fuel mechanic. They haven't been really hardcore about this, though. It's a pretty lenient mechanic, and you're probably never going to run out of fuel unless you're really not paying attention. However, when you go ahead and actually equip a flamethrower to your buggy, that may change. It actually is fairly easy to run out of fuel, and you're really going to want to pay attention to that, unlike my brother in the footage you're seeing here, who burned through all of the fuel in his buggy in the middle of the night in a field with about 100 zombies in it. I actually had to show up, slide through a bunch of zombies, kill them, try and kill as many of them as I could, revive him, get back into my buggy, and then continue to run over more zombies while he tried to fuel up his vehicle. Pretty awesome moment, and a part of it makes me wish it was actually easier to run out of fuel so moments like that could happen more often. But fuel is really abundant. You can actually salvage, I should say siphon it from cars that you find parked all over the countryside. You can also find gas stations, which are an unlimited resource of fuel. So there's no real reason to run out of fuel other than burning up too much flamethrower fuel and not paying attention. But when it does happen, it can create some pretty awesome moments, and I'm totally on board for that. Now, outside of all the upgrade systems and all that cool stuff for the buggies, right, you know, the question is, are the buggies fun? Like, yeah, I mean, they are. All those small upgrades, you know, adding a flamethrower and upgrading a roll cage, adding a ramming thing on the front of the buggy to kill more zombies more efficiently, that's all a big part of it. Something that is really satisfying about running over zombies in the middle of the night in the pouring rain in Dying Light. And it's not like this isn't the first game to let you run over zombies. I mean, Dead Rising did it 1,000 times over, but it just never felt as satisfying and it never felt as risky. There's something about Dying Light that even when you're mowing down hundreds of zombies inside of a buggy, you still have that sort of sense of things could go wrong at any moment, especially when you're doing it in the middle of the night. And a part of that is the fact that there are still quite a few zombies that you need to be afraid of in the darkness. That includes the volatiles as well as the virals. They are both zombie types that can do substantial damage to you in your buggy. Volatiles as a whole have always been one of the biggest threats in Dying Light. That remains the same thing here. It's why I recommend some of your first upgrades being those UV lights, and then eventually, when you hit level 12, I believe it is, you can get the UV safe zone, because if you get caught out in the night by volatiles, they'll shred your vehicle, and they will shred it hard, and you'll have a lot of fun trying to get it back. Fortunately, all of the safe zones in the game have a vehicle recall, so if your vehicle does actually end up being loitered by a bunch of teenager volatiles, who are just, trying to ruin your day, you can recall it to a safe zone and you don't really have to deal with that anymore. But they seriously will mess you up. The best thing you can do is just run away. Now the virals, which of course appear in the daytime as well, they're incredibly agile. In the lore, they are humans that just turned into zombies, so they still have a lot of their motor functions. What they like to do is to jump onto your car, actually. They will jump onto the side of your buggy and they will try and maul at you, and you'll have to do a little bit of a melee with the left stick in order to get them off. Otherwise, they'll just hit you until you die, so it's something to look out for. Now, I have to say, I'm showing you guys probably a lot of nighttime footage, and that's because nighttime for me was one of my favorite things to do in the following. In the base game, nighttime is incredibly scary. It's way too stressful some of the time, especially if you're playing the game alone. It's a brutal scenario. I'm not saying that that's not intact in the following, but there's something about having the buggy as a weapon that makes it a little bit more... How should I say this? It's like cheating death over and over. Like that satisfaction you get from doing something a little bit risky in life. Driving too fast. Riding your bicycle off a really big jump or something. Snowboarding down a big cliff. That sort of adrenaline that you can get from that idea. It's the same sort of idea when you drive the buggy at night. Like, things can go well, but you also know they can go terribly, terribly wrong. And I think on top of that, of course, the whole visual and graphical, aesthetic of Dying Light just makes it a satisfying experience. Driving in the dark, headlights on, the orange gauges of the buggy glowing. It's all very atmospheric. It feels spooky. You hear the screams of a lot of the larger zombie types in the nighttime, and it just all kind of comes together and feels a little bit special. And that definitely clicks for me. Now, outside of all the buggy driving, there are, of course, a handful of missions and side quests that are going to ask you to get out of the buggy. But I would say that the following does make a big emphasis on letting the player stay in the buggy. There's a lot of missions that will ask you to race from point A to point B in a certain amount of time to perhaps stop a pipe from bursting so the village doesn't lose fresh water. And there's a lot of other scenarios like that where you're racing from one point to the other. In fact, a lot of the random missions, sort of random objectives that pop up, like save this person being attacked by zombies or grab an airdrop, are now made a little bit more tense by the idea that there is a substantial timer on them, and usually they will appear relatively far away from the player, forcing you to race to that location. It is going to take a little bit of map knowledge to understand where the roads are in the game. It's not like you can't go off-road, but trust me, after you've accidentally crashed into enough lakes, forests, and then were killed by volatiles, especially if you're running at night, you're going to want to start using the roads. The world, the countryside that exists in the following has been designed for the use of the buggies, and if you stick to the roads, you can really get from one side to the other fairly quickly. But as I was saying, these missions are still going to ask you to get outside of the buggy. There's still plenty of reason to use your melee weapons. You're going to be dealing with plenty of zombies, not to mention the new bandits, as well as a lot of Rise's men, who are now disbanded and spread all over the countryside, wreaking their own sort of havoc. A lot of these dudes actually like to carry firearms as well. And this is something I kind of want to segue into here. The melee system in Dying Light has always been pretty damn fantastic. I don't think many games have pulled off first-person melee as well as Techland has with Dying Light. They've definitely outdone themselves with anything they ever did in the Dead Island series. However, the firearms and the bow, which was introduced in the Bozak Horde, and now the crossbow in the following, have never really seen fair treatment in my opinion. I know it's a melee-focused game first and foremost, but why can't these weapon types get a little bit more love? I would love to see Techland put their creativity, the same creativity that exists in the melee weapon and upgrade and customization system, and the crafting system, making electrified axes and all that, into the weapon system. How cool would it be to have a suppressed Uzi with electrified bullets or something like that? Like, that just sounds freaking awesome to me. I'd love to see them do their take on that. Maybe make ammunition a little bit more scarce than it is now, so weapons are something you still rarely use, but it would just be cool to see them be a little bit more effective. Especially in the harder difficulties, the bows and the arrows and the firearms, they're just kind of pointless. Like, why have them if they're not going to be nearly as effective as my melee weapons? Even the addition of a range capability with a firearm or a bow doesn't seem to outweigh the use of a melee weapon. That's just something I would have liked to see them change, and hey, who knows, maybe in the future we'll see something like that for Dying Light, or for a possible sequel or future expansion. Now, really the last thing we need to talk about are the story and the characters. We're only going to talk about this briefly because, I'll be honest, it's the same thing that you saw in the base game. It's not great. The characters are rough around the edges, the storytelling is meh, it's not incredibly interesting, and the dialogue itself is hilariously poorly written at times. The best thing you can do is just laugh at all of it. Laugh at all of it, and remember what makes Dying Light Dying Light. It's the gameplay, it's the sandbox elements, the open world, and in this case with the following, it's the buggies. Go do your missions, have fun, murder a bunch of zombies, use your melee weapons, find new melee weapons, take on volatiles, take on the new ultra bosses, which are brand new co-op focused bosses that are pretty much the size of a one-story building. Actually, probably more so the size of a two-story building, and they're quite the bullet sponges. Overall, I feel the following is just one of the best expansions I've played for a game in a very long time, and it's also probably the only properly done open world zombie survival game that makes vehicles part of the core experience. I've always wanted to see a game where you were in a world, zombie survival style, but vehicles were your primary point of safety. They were your primary weapon, they were a primary place of sleep and restoration and safety. I've always wanted to see a game take that element and then build off of that. And in many ways, the following has been that game. It has all those great hardcore survival elements. It's not extremely arcadey like Dead Rising was. Nothing wrong with Dead Rising. That's just the direction that game was going. And it's done something that just no one's really done with this genre yet. And I don't think people recognize that. And to me, that's kind of special. Because, let's be honest, doing zombies is something that is being done endlessly. There's so many games out there doing zombies. I would say that Techland has always been one of the best developers, even if their games haven't always been at the top of their game. But I think Dying Light very much is one of those examples of zombies just done really damn well. And the following is an example of zombies done really damn well in a way that no one has really done zombies. So a big bonus to the following. At the end of the day, it is an expansion that I strongly recommend. And if I had to tell people yes or no, I would say yes, 100%. It's a game that I would recommend to just about everyone I know. I'm recommending it to you. Do yourself a favor. Don't let Dying Light slip past you like it probably did in 2015, and make it your co-op game of 2016. You won't regret it. Your friends won't regret it. You'll have a hell of a lot of good times murdering zombies in your dirt buggies, and you'll have some awesome stories and memories to tell at the end of all of it. If you guys have any other questions for me, any other thoughts regarding the review, and if you've, of course, been playing the following yourself, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Any awesome moments that you've had, feel free to share them down in the comments section below. And I'll see you in the next one.